everyone. Welcome back to Zilog and Moto, the show where I dig through the ancient relics of the Master System, Genesis, Sega CD, and 32X library, and every week review a different title through the eyes of someone that's been playing games, old and new, for over 35 years. Each week is interesting in its own way, at least for me, and I hope for you as well, as I've come across games that are on all points of the spectrum: good, bad, mediocre, and then titles that I thought would be good that ended up bad, or the reverse, and titles that I had low expectations for and ended up very pleasantly surprised. This week's game is from the Master System, and I try to hit the Master System at least once a month, as it actually has a much bigger library than you might expect if you only know it from North America. One of those titles that Americans wouldn't know exists is today's topic, in Asterix. Now, it kind of makes sense that Asterix and its subsequent sequels on both the Master System and the Mega Drive was a PAL exclusive, as Asterix originated in the comic strip in the French comic anthology magazine Pilote on the 29th of October in 1959. Asterix is definitely one of the oldest subjects of a licensed title that we'll be dealing with on Zilog and Moto, with probably only some of the games based on Disney characters being older. Asterix is a main character of a comic series that sees the Gauls, aka the historical French, fighting back against the Roman Empire in 50 BC. Due to the vast stretches of the Roman Empire, stories quickly branched out from just the setting of Gaul and involved most of Europe, aiding in Asterix's surge in popularity in the mid to late 60s. And Asterix did make inroads into the United States. I don't want to make it seem like no one knows who or what the character is over here. While Asterix isn't hugely popular in the United States, the volumes of the cartoons are available here, very similar to The Adventures of Tintin, and I specifically remember watching a few of the movies on the Disney Channel in the 1980s, which is how I came to know the character originally. The film I remember specifically is The 12 Tasks of Asterix, originally released in 1976, and I definitely recommend it if you're interested about the series. You don't need to be familiar with any characters or backstories or anything like that to enjoy it. Asterix the game for the Master System was released in Europe in December of 1991, and then later on was picked up in Brazil as well, where the console was still going strong. Asterix did so well that it was followed by Asterix and the Secret Mission on the Master System, Asterix and the Great Rescue on both the Master System and the Mega Drive, and then finally Asterix and the Power of the Gods exclusively for the Mega Drive. All games that we'll eventually look at on the channel. Of course, none of those titles were released in the United States, so it'll be fun to track down some of those copies, but that's a problem for another day. Going with the theme of comic collections and films, there's actually a multitude of ways they could have gone with Asterix as far as the genre of the game goes, but for this title, they went with a side-scrolling platformer, which makes sense with as popular as that genre was at the time, especially since it features cartoon characters. I didn't plan on doing another platformer title so close to Garfield Caught in the Act, but that's just the way it worked out. Don't worry, I'll throw in a bunch of sports titles next or something. Anyway, enough scheduling nonsense. Let's take a look at Asterix, which seems to have a pretty good reputation online. But first, a look at the package.
Okay, here is the first Asterix title, imaginatively named Asterix, as you can tell by the great big Asterix logo down at the bottom. This copy of Asterix is in really good shape. I've got to say, a lot of these copies of Master System games I get in from Europe have been very well taken care of, and I definitely appreciate that. The outer cover doesn't have any blemishes anywhere that I can tell, and the case still has the hang tab intact, and firm as well, as if it hasn't been bent too much. One other cool thing about this copy, and this is something you only see on PAL games, is it still has the Sega seal sticker over the opening, so you know this is definitely an original case. I don't know why the PAL games had those stickers. I'm just going to assume that maybe it was done to avoid having to use shrink wrap. As far as the actual cover art goes, I think this cover is really good, while still sticking to the Master System white crosshatch styling. You've got a good drawing of Asterix, Obelix, and Dogmatix right in the center, and then in the background there's a nice faded collage of screenshots from the game. I can't remember seeing that before in the last 83 episodes, so this was cool to see, and just shows how much improved graphic design had gotten by late 1991. Also, shows some confidence on Sega's part, as they knew this game looked good and they weren't afraid to show it off. And even though this is a later release with a vastly improved design, they still kept to having the game category of action in the upper corner, which I think is a nice touch. Flipping over to the back, and there's a pretty basic PAL Leda error layout, with flavor text in 7 languages, up from the usual 6, which makes sense due to Asterix's wide popularity across Europe. Of course, that also means even less space than usual for the flavor text, but I think the basic message of rescue the druid Getafix and save the village more or less gets the point across. Another unfortunate aspect of having to dedicate all that space to the different languages is it really shrunk the available real estate for screenshots. Sega included 4 good quality screenshots from the game, each from a different level and featuring Asterix and Obelix, but they're each literally the size of a postage stamp, so even though they're good quality, you have to pull out a magnifying glass to see anything. Feels like there had to be a better way to do that, but I guess I can't complain too much. One quick note about the round count down below. Usually rounds refer to how many levels are in the game. In this case, Sega decided to put 8 on the cover, and while that's correct, sort of, I think they shortchanged themselves. I'll get more into this further on in the review, but in actuality, think of those 8 rounds like worlds in Super Mario Bros., with each round usually consisting of 2 or 3 levels, and those levels change slightly depending on whether you're playing as Asterix or Obelix, so the game is actually a lot bigger than it appears. Opening up the box, and both the cartridge and manual are in pretty good shape. The manual has definitely seen some wear, but these thicker PAL manuals are more difficult to keep in pristine condition, just due to their size and the paper stock that's used. The manual is about the same as any other PAL manual you've seen, where you've got the same instructions 7 times over 2 pages, but they still include plenty of screenshots and then creatively will space icons with numbers across the bottom of the 2-page spreads to best use the available space. And they even managed to fit in a nice intro that flushes out the backstory bit, and I always like to see that. I haven't run across a poor PAL manual yet, and this one is no exception. Okay, well that's the package. Let's get into this review and see if Asterix lives up to the hype that I've been reading about it online for the last few weeks. When making a licensed game about something, anything, one of the key things that designers have to keep in mind when coming up with a game is, does the game feel like the thing that the game is supposed to be based on? For instance, when I looked at Garfield Caught in the Act a few weeks ago, one of the reasons why I gave it such a poor review was that even though the animation was top-notch and came directly from Jim Davis and Paws Incorporated, it didn't feel like Garfield. The only characters in the game from Garfield were Garfield, Odie, and I guess Pookie, Garfield's stuffed bear. But there was no John, no Nermal, and no lasagna, because for some reason the designers decided to make the health power-ups pizza and hamburgers instead. I understand that when designing a game, especially with certain licenses, you have to take a few liberties to make a fun game out of it, but Garfield isn't one of those. Having said all that, does Asterix feel authentic to the comic book and cartoon? I would say yes. I'm certainly not the biggest Asterix fan in the world, but even from the little I know and the few movies I've seen, Asterix the game definitely exists in that universe. First, the plot of the game is completely in line with the overall plot of Asterix, whereby a small village in Gaul, modern-day France for those of you not up on your ancient European geography, has managed to defy Caesar and the Roman Empire by not allowing themselves to be taken over by the Romans. How have they managed this? Well, by way of a potion that was brewed by a druid named Getafix. You get it? His name is Getafix. Yeah, you get it. That gives Gauls superhuman strength and the ability to defend themselves from the Roman invaders. For the game's plot, Getafix is sneakily kidnapped by the Romans, and without Getafix to brew the Gauls more potion, the Gauls will soon be run out and not be able to fight off the Romans anymore. This is where your heroes Asterix and Obelix come in, and along with their dog Dogmatix, go on an adventure fighting Romans all across Europe to rescue Getafix and save their village. This could very easily be the plot of one of the graphic novels or films. And it might be, I'll be honest, I certainly don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of the series. So Asterix fans should definitely be happy with the use of the characters in the game. Going along with the idea of trying to make the game feel authentic to the source material is how the game utilizes both the characters of Asterix and Obelix. As you might have noticed when we were looking at the back cover of the game, it supports 2 players. And when playing in 2-player mode, one player will use Asterix when going through the levels, and one player will use Obelix. If you play in single-player mode, you can still use Asterix or Obelix, the difference being you can choose who you want to use in each level, and that ability to choose who you play in a level is key. As anyone who is familiar with the Asterix series knows, Asterix and Obelix are 2 wildly different characters. This isn't a situation like Mario and Luigi, where, at least in the earlier games, the characters were exactly the same, just with one being red and the other one being green. Asterix the character is smaller and faster, and even with the special potion still has to sometimes use his head to outsmart the Romans. On the other hand, Obelix is larger, i.e. stronger, slower, and isn't quite as smart, and as such has to get by with that extra strength. This translates to the game as Asterix and Obelix play differently. Asterix is a bit quicker and can jump higher, where Obelix can break blocks that are in his way. Also, during gameplay, each character has 2 different potions that they can collect as they make their way through the levels, and the levels are slightly different depending on which character you play with due to those ability differences. So if you're playing in single-player mode and choose to play through the entire game as Asterix, and then go back and play through as Obelix, you'll end up with 2 very different gameplay experiences. And it's almost as if it's 2 similar but different games. This is very impressive to me and certainly adds a lot of replay value to the game. I know there's other games out there where you can play through them with a few different characters that have different abilities. For example, Super Mario Bros. 2 or some of the games in the Castlevania series, like Castlevania Bloodlines on the Genesis. But I can't think of another game that actually alters the levels for a truly different experience, and certainly not in the 8-bit era. Another way in which Asterix feels authentic to the source material is the graphics. The graphics in Asterix are nothing short of phenomenal for the Master System. I can definitely say that I've seen Genesis games with worse graphics than what Asterix displays. Part of that is due to the fact that Asterix really pushes the limits of the Master System and weighs in at a hefty 4 megabits, similar to some of the early Genesis titles we've looked at like Altered Beast and Forgotten Worlds. And I can definitely say that space isn't wasted. Asterix has some very detailed and colorful sprites, and even though the sprites can be a little on the small side, which is common for 8-bit games, they look like they've taken directly from an Asterix graphic novel. The animation in the game is very smooth, and it feels a bit like playing a cartoon, or at least as close as a Master System title can get to that. Beyond how good it looks, during the entire time I played it, I experienced only a small amount of graphical glitching. Now, part of that is because Sega was smart about how they designed the levels and didn't let too much get going on in the screen at one time, but even still, I was incredibly impressed with how well the game performed. I think I only noticed slowdown once or twice in very specific areas, and the only time I caught flickering was very late in the game, which is highly unusual for a Master System game, because often they have issues when too many sprites are located on the same horizontal space across the screen. Yes, some of the backgrounds can be a little bit boring and low on details, but again, it's an 8-bit title and the backgrounds change significantly as you progress from level to level. So even though they aren't that detailed, you won't get bored from looking at the same screens all the time. I can't say enough about how impressed I am with how Asterix looks. From a gameplay perspective, Asterix isn't your average 8-bit platformer, and to an extent, I would say it's more involved than even certain 16-bit platformers, case in point the previously mentioned Garfield. Part of this is due to the previously mentioned system of having 2 characters that play slightly different in Asterix and Obelix. But even beyond that, as you play the game, you'll find that you have to use your brain a little bit, and the game isn't as simple as just jumping over holes in the ground or killing enemies that get in your way before they have a chance to take you out. Don't get me wrong, you do plenty of both of those in Asterix, and Asterix provides a nice array of enemies throughout the game that look completely different from one another and attack differently, giving the game a nice bit of variety from an enemy perspective. This need to actually think about how to progress through some of the levels was actually frustrating in the beginning, as I was just expecting a standard platformer, and I ended up getting stuck on some very early levels. But once I figured out what to do and how best to utilize the potions you're given, the game becomes very fun, and that bit of variety is nice. I can definitely say that I don't think I've ever played a platformer like Asterix in that regard. The levels in Asterix have a nice variety as well. Without taking into consideration the fact that the levels are slightly different depending on who you play as, the game consists of a total of 21 levels split amongst 8 geographic areas in Europe. Some levels are short and direct, and some are a bit longer and don't have a clear path through them. I wouldn't say they have maze aspects specifically, but you will have to pay attention to where you're going, as in those levels it's not a simple matter of just going from right to left. However, all the levels make sense, and none of them are too complicated to where you'll get stuck, or at least they aren't designed to be. There are also a few levels with bosses thrown in here and there, but the bosses aren't on a specific pattern, so the game keeps you guessing. Along with the decided differences in level design from one to the next, the levels change up as you go, with some taking place outside, some inside, some underground, and some in the water. And keeping with the theme of not just going from left to right, some levels have you going to different screens vertically as you pass through them, expanding the play area in levels greatly. The first time I experienced a level like this, I was shocked, as I totally wasn't expecting that in an 8-bit title, and all of a sudden I had jumped up above the screen to a new area, allowing me to take an alternate path through the level. And this variety in levels definitely kept me playing, as I genuinely wanted to see what was coming next, as it was always something different. I haven't mentioned the sound yet in the game, so I should probably cover that quickly. The game doesn't have many sound effects, but the ones it does have sound appropriate for the game, and are clear and not raspy or distorted. What's more important is the music. All the music in the game is very good, or at least as good as you're going to get out of the standard Master System sound processor. But along with the fact that the music sounds good, there's also plenty of it, and you won't be listening to the same 3 tracks over and over again. The music changes up depending on which level you're in, and sometimes, say the Egypt levels, it's themed so that it matches the area that you're in. There's one area in round 6 where fire is engulfing the level and you have to move quickly to get away from it or else you'll be instantly killed, and during this level, the music goes to a frenetic pace matching up with the on-screen action. On an 8-bit machine like the Master System, there's only so much you can really expect out of the sound, but Sega did a really good job of not just having a game that looked good, but sounded good as well. As you can probably tell if you've been paying attention so far, there's a lot to like here with Asterix, and I can definitely say it lives up to its reputation as being one of the best games on the console. I debated briefly about what rating to give Asterix, and what might be a surprise, I even toyed with the idea of giving it my first 5-star rating on Zilog and Moto, but I don't think I can honestly say that I think it's better than something like Phantasy Star. So instead, Asterix will just have to deal with only being a 4-star release. If you're a Master System fan, Asterix has to be a must-buy for your collection, unless you just really hate platformers. But even in that case, I'd still give it a shot, because Sega wisely included infinite continues, and you'll need them to get through level 7-3. Trust me on this.
Okay, that was Asterix. This is one of those reviews that I really enjoyed doing for the channel, simply because this is a great game, and more than likely I never would have experienced it on my own had I not been going through the entire library. I don't beat every game that's reviewed, just due to time constraints, but thankfully I was able to make it all the way through this one, and getting to see those end credits roll was wholly satisfying. I hope someone out there sees this review and plays through Asterix and gets that same sense of satisfaction from completing a good game. Tune in next week as we visit the Tengen library on the Genesis again. I know I just did Rose Blasters last week, but as I was looking through my shelves to try to pick out a follow-up to Asterix, this one particular game caught my eye, and I thought it would fit in well this week. I've played it before, and well, let's just say it's not as good as the arcade version it's based on, but I don't really want to say any more than that due to not wanting to scare anyone off. Remember, whatever you like to play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.